Wheel of Genre, the show for readers whose Proustian experience involves transdimensional slippage. Each week we pick a different author, idea, or genre, and we read it. And right now we are reading the complete John Silence stories by Algernon Blackwood, including this, the final story in the collection, A Victim of Higher Space. I'm Zach, and this week I am super interested in the tonal shift that happens between this story and the previous 5 stories in the collection.
I'm Bob. I'm interested in higher space. Zach, my idea of the geometry of the weird was true. It turns out it was all right. I'm really interested in the... we've seen so many times now with Algernon Blackwood, different dimensions coming in and messing things up, eclipsing our dimension, squeezing through into our dimension, obsessing people, luring people in. And here it seems we actually get a kind of glimpse of someone who has been there and back again, or someone who is, as you said, slipstreaming. They are stuck in between third dimension and fourth dimension, or all of these other higher dimensions. And we're seeing Blackwood try and grapple with how on earth do you represent that?
Right. And I think that what this story is doing for me is it is affirming this kind of suspicion that I've had for a while now that Blackwood is really like a mystic first and foremost. He's interested in the spiritual and the material world and how they blend first and foremost, and he's a horror writer second. The horror is almost incidental to the kind of cosmic consciousness explorations that he does in these stories. But first off, I think that we should talk a little bit about where this comes from, where the story comes from, because it wasn't in the original 1908 book called John Silence, Physician Extraordinary. Actually, it debuted in the magazine The Occult Review in December 1914, and then was collected in Blackwood's collection Day and Night Stories all the way in 1917. So this story is coming out 6 years after the previous John Silence stories. And in a sense, I think that we are seeing a slightly different side of him, a different dimension of the character.
Nice. Are you throwing it to me? Oh, I'm in a new dimension now. Okay. So we are seeing a new dimension of the character. I think, again, quite Holmesian, because, we have 221 Baker Street. Here we have Silence at his own house, and he has his servant Barker answer the door. And we get to see his house and the way he takes clients in, and it's quite strange. He has this place called the Green Study, where he has a chair nailed to the floor. He has this drug he pumps through the walls to make people more relaxed, and he has a peephole. It really was a little bit disturbing, this dimension that we're seeing of John Silence. Feels very much, really is getting a little bit horror here. But I think you're right. We also, it feels like a different series almost. It's John Silence as we're still dealing with dimensions, we're still dealing with the inexplainable, we're still dealing with psychic issues, but it does feel like John Silence is at his most consulting detective, and it feels kind of funny in a way that the others weren't, and it feels like a different story. So much time has passed, and it's much shorter than the other stories too.
To me, it feels less consulting detective and more true to the title that we've seen before, which is Physician Extraordinary. He feels like a doctor more than anything to me here. And, I've said before that sometimes it feels a little like he's Dr. Freud, people have their mental problems, their psychic problems that they come to him to be fixed. And that is this story in a nutshell. But to get to the bones of it, we have Racine Mudge, a nervous mathematician who basically keeps slipping out of this world of 3 dimensions, which we inhabit, into the 4th dimension. And it's really interesting how the way that he says it happens is through a kind of mental transformation that comes through studying mathematics. And I do think that there is a strong intended reference to Plato here. Plato famously said that the only subject we're studying is mathematics because it's the only eternal set of knowledge. Mathematics will never change, but in this transitory material world, things change, things come to be and slip away, things die, for example. So what it says is, as he's studying, he seems to know instinctively mathematics. It's like a memory of what I had deeply studied before. The principles were in my blood, and I simply raced through the ordinary stages and beyond and did the same with geometry. Another Plato reference, Plato famously had this idea that when it comes to mathematics, we don't learn mathematics. We simply recall mathematics, which we've already always known. But what this mathematician does is he goes a little bit too deep. He studies a little bit too hard and somehow unlocks, fourth dimensional space. And certain things cause him to, again, slip away. The sound of classical music, of Wagner, I believe, causes him to slip out of our visible world and into that fourth dimensional space until he can return. It's quite a tale. It's quite good.
Quite a tale. Let's figure out what higher space is, because yes, as he's doing all of these mathematics, he gets in too deep and he says, and then I found myself into a world, my disease. But he describes to John Silence, as John Silence says, yes, I already knew this. Of course, I figured this out myself. But he says that what it is, John Silence, is this room now that we sit in has one side open to space, the higher space. A closed box only seems closed. And later he demonstrates this, but when he drinks from a flask, he doesn't have to actually take the cap off. He just somehow holds it up and the alcohol can pass from this closed flask into his body. But then he also tries to describe it to us. He says, there are things that have a more true shape. And when you go into this other dimension, you can see the fullness of all of these things. So what you think, he says, if I hold this book and I move my hand all around it, I have not really made a complete circuit because it exists in other ways in this dimension that if I move my hand around it, it doesn't actually touch those parts of the book that are trapped or living in that other dimension. And it's dangerous for him and he wants out of it. Of course, this could be an amazing discovery, but he says when he goes into that other dimension, there are things that are so horrifying, these things that he has always known to be true or seen or thought that he understood. Now when he goes into these other dimensions, and it's not just the fourth, it's everything higher, he sees these terrifying truths behind objects.
So this idea is really interesting to me. And to be honest with you, the first time I encountered it was either in Three Body Problem or its sequel, The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu. It really changed my thinking because before, whenever people would talk about like other dimensions, I would kind of imagine like, maybe like a Philip K. Dick-esque alternate timeline or a world that is like spatially where this world is, but it's just like a different place or a different branch in the universal tree. But actually, I think that the way that these authors intend to use it is literally mathematically. Like if you think of an image drawn on a two-dimensional piece of paper, those characters cannot look out of the paper and look at you. They can only look up and down in those two dimensions. And if you extrapolate that, then we live in our three dimensions. So, we can look right and left, we can look up and down, but like those characters on the 2D flat piece of paper, we can never look into a fourth dimension. So this idea has a long history, and that history actually starts right before this story was written. So in the 1880s, there was this guy named Charles Hinton, and he wrote an essay called What is the Fourth Dimension? You could think of Charles Hinton, I guess, as maybe like a Neil deGrasse Tyson of the 1880s. He's a science and mathematics popularizer. So it's through him that a lot of these occult writers and a lot of these science fiction writers got the idea of like that there could be more dimensions. And if there are more dimensions, then other things could inhabit those dimensions that we simply could not see, could not perceive, could not interact with. He coined the concept of a tesseract, which I'm going to put the image on the screen, and maybe it won't go on the screen because I think you need a GIF to represent this because you have to imagine. I'm just going to describe it in case I can't get it up on the screen right there, right now. So if you think of a cube, a cube, if you were to unfold a cube, you would have 6 squares. So, everyone now in your mind just kind of origami together a cube out of 6 square pieces of paper. A tesseract, which is his contribution, is an object that when you unfold it, you have 6 cubes. And that is a 4th dimensional object. It's something that the brain can't even really conceive. You have to go on Wikipedia, and you can't see a static object on there. If you're not seeing it on the screen right now, go on Wikipedia. They can't represent it as a static object. It has to be a movable GIF. And then there's one other book I wanted to bring up, which is 1884, Edwin Abbott. Yes, his middle name is the same name as his last name. Edwin Abbott wrote a novella called Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions, which is a 2-dimensional world that satirizes the class and gender hierarchies of Victorian society, a book that I think we should read someday. So all I'm saying is mathematical dimensions are everywhere, or are they nowhere at this time?
Well, how are people perceiving this? Because John Silence seems to be kind of interested in the idea, and he says, I've been researching it too. He even cautions Racine by saying, are you sure you want to end this? Like, why is it so terrifying to you? It's kind of a shame because you could learn a lot. But for Racine Mudge, it's terrifying. And I wonder, do we think that John Silence / Algernon Blackwood is it that we just cannot comprehend these other dimensions, so it drives us insane, or it takes away what we thought we understood? Or is there something actually terrifying? Is it more Lovecraftian, where there are these just ugly, disgusting, horrible beings lurking there? When Racine says, please keep me here, don't let me go, tell those marchers out there to stop playing the Tannhauser Overture, I don't want to hear Wagner, it's going to make me disappear. And Algernon Blackwood's, trying to hold on to him, not let him float away into nothingness. But he describes why it's so terrible to him. And he says that I can scarcely recognize as a human body as ghastly, simply ghastly. And to see inside everything and everybody is a form of insight peculiarly distressing. He says that what he sees is a world of monsters, horses, dogs, cats, all of which he loved. People, trees, children, all that I have considered beautiful, he says. Everything from a human face to a cathedral appear to me in a different shape and aspect to all I have known before. Are they actually monstrous? Or do we think Blackwood is saying we just can't comprehend it, so it seems so terrible to us because it cancels out everything we thought we knew?
Yeah, it seems almost like, for Blackwood, the spiritual self is a real thing. It may not be a material thing, but it is fundamentally real. And the vibe I'm getting from this is that he thinks that if the spiritual self exists anywhere, it's going to exist in that 4th dimension. If we could perceive the 4th dimension, we could see the spirit of the horse, and it's ugly. We could see the spirit of the dog, and it's nasty. And we could see the spirit of the human, and it's not what we expect it to be in a very real sense. I do want to say that, it's been a long time since I've read Kant, but I think that Kantian ideas are really at play here. Science today says that we live in a kind of quantum soup, I guess we could say. You know what I mean? Like, colors don't actually exist. They are vibrations in the light. They're wavelengths. And it takes our wetware, our organs, our sense organs, our eyes, our body, in order to convert this kind of quantum soup, this undifferentiated mass of vibrations and experience into time and space and dimensionality and just the conscious experience of being alive. So I think that what is really presupposed behind all of this is the idea that we are held back by our wetware. We are held back by our bodies And we are limited to only perceiving these three dimensions because we perceive it through the ears and the eyes and the tongue and the touch, and one more that I'm currently forgetting.
Taste?
Taste, that's it. Thank you.
Taste. Yeah.
Mentally, I was like 1, 2, 3, 4. Damn it!
4 dimensions, 4 senses. That's all.
Yeah.
I wonder, it seems also very similar to like Dr. Bernardo Kastrup of this idea that as Racine Mudge describes it, not as Blackwood describes it, but he says, as you said, it's a spiritual condition. There is no space at all. There is only the spiritual condition. And then he explains that his 3-dimensional body is a projection of his 4th-dimensional body. He says, as I discovered, my ordinary 3-dimensional body was just an expression of his higher dimensional body. It feels like Dr. Bernardo Kastrup's idea, I don't even understand what that idea is, but that our experience is like the little avatar-like body entering into this world that gives experience to the spiritual version of it. That's not what it is, but that seems to be what Racine Mudge is saying here. And I was thinking, like, just to give a stupid example, but he says that when he starts to disappear and when he hears the Tannhauser overture and he starts to fly off, he seems to lose his body itself seems to lose tether to the 3 dimensions, and he then becomes his 4-dimensional body. So I want to bring up this stupid idea. I was just thinking about this. When he's flying away, Don Silence has to hold on to him. He says when he comes back, he says, your intense thinking about me brought me back, because John Silence is thinking, oh no, where'd you go? Where'd you go? And that power, those thoughts that John Silence is sending out, or that his spirit is emanating, it brings back from the 4th dimension back to the 3rd dimension, his 3rd-dimensional body. And I was thinking, like, for things that we believe in, you know the old idea of Santa Claus, like if you don't believe in Santa Claus will cease to exist. I wonder if ideas like that, concepts like that seem to have in our minds this, at least when you're a kid, you do believe in Santa Claus, and Santa Claus is moving everywhere, flying around the world to put gifts under every tree. But if you don't believe in Santa Claus ceases to exist. I'm wondering if that is kind of, if he is a 4th-dimensional being, Santa. Sorry, stupid idea.
It would explain a lot. It would really explain a lot how he gets down those chimneys for such a big guy.
For such a big guy.
My favorite aspect of trying to figure out what's up with this was the idea that in order to bring himself back, he simply had to drink alcohol. Like this idea that like maybe alcohol is in some sense like spiritually blunting. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which I think is quite perhaps true in its own sense. But like, if the mind is wandering off and allowing transcendence to the 4th dimension, just drink a little and it'll bring you right back down to the material world,
I guess it depends on the person. Maybe other people drinking alcohol might take them up to the 4th dimension, I suppose. But
maybe.
Yes. And so blocking the spirit or dampening the spirit or kind of blunting it is a big part of this. That seems to be, it's what Racine Mudge says, okay, give me the alcohol, let me drink this. I will help me avoid floating away. But it still doesn't exactly work, because when the Tannhauser overture begins again, I think that's what they're playing. Anyway, when it begins again, he floats away, and it's described just absolutely insanely. It's kind of like reminds me of the Crawler in Annihilation, of all of these things that don't really make sense. You can't really imagine it. But it says, Racine Mudge, his face distorted beyond all recognition, was making a marvelous inward movement, as though doubling back on himself. He turned funnel-wise like water, like a whirling vortex, and then appeared to break up somewhat as a reflection breaks up and divides in a distorting convex mirror. And it gets so nuts that eventually, just because everything is kind of shifted or disappeared into that other dimension, except for his leg, which John Silence is just still holding, and he just has this man's severed leg. Very strange. But I think it was interesting what he tells him how to stop it. He says, block the entrances. And this feels very much like the Willows. He doesn't say dampen the entrances, but he says train yourself, make yourself able to stop it using your own mind. And we've seen that in the one about the fire, where it's also Hubbard, and Hubbard is the narrator, because he tells Hubbard, put yourself in an envelope, basically. Put all of your thoughts in a protective envelope so you can be safe on any of these other thoughts that are going to try and control you. And this is what he's telling Racine Mudge. He says, by concentration, they are all within you, these entrances, although outer cases such as color, music, and other things lead you towards them. So these things might take you out again. But he says, these external things you cannot hope to destroy. But once the entrances are blocked, they will lead you only to bricked walls and closed channels. You will no longer be able to find the way. So he has to block off the fourth dimension, and he can never go back. But at least he will be safe and exist in the third dimension again if he can control his mind and his thoughts.
You know, it brings me back to what we said. I think it was 2 stories ago. The one with the brothers, the one where their evil thoughts had left a photograph on the world. That story gives us the only kind of ethical imperative that John Silence seems to ever really give the reader, which is to control your thoughts so that you leave behind good thoughts in this world. And I see this as kind of like really the recurring thread that runs through every single story. Not just every John Silence story, but every Blackwood story. The importance of thought, of the psyche, not only in how we should live, but how these thoughts affect the world and the people around us.
Do you think, I mean, how does that make you feel as we're doing this for Occult Detective Month, right? And we've read quite a few detective stories. How does it make you feel as a detective who is trying to protect the psyche or trying to protect this idea of thoughts? Does it feel like, is it real detective work, I guess?
It's so hard to say because, I mean, I think that fundamentally what we're missing in terms of detective work is a crime. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a crime that we're detecting who is responsible for it. Maybe we could say that there is a dark disturbance on reality, an occult occurrence, and we are detecting the supernatural being that is responsible for it. I suppose the denouement of each story, in a sense, functions that way. And I guess that's really, to me, what aligns it with the detective story.
So yeah, it's more like thought crimes than crimes, I guess. Keeping thoughts good, figuring out what happened, and then bringing these demons to justice often.
Bob, I want to ask you, because I watched a really interesting video that was published recently from Michael K. Vaughan, who's also reading the John Silence stories right now. And he said something that really, really gave me pause to think. He basically condemned John Silence for having, in his view, a clearly wrong view of the world. So he says that so many of these stories are explained in pseudoscientific terms. And he describes Blackwood himself as a victim of pseudoscience. And this really got me thinking because it never occurred to me that this was important. You know what I mean? Like, in a sense, for myself, I view the charm of Blackwood as a kind of historical reflection of the moment and as a document of what is going on with occult thinkers. I mean, he was a member of the Golden Dawn. You know what I mean? So do you feel like the fact that, science, that these stories are not scientific holds back the John Silence stories from receiving an A+?
I think he's got a really interesting point, but I think it's more about, okay, what are we mad at? Is it that the occult is becoming too scienced, or is it that science is becoming too occult? But I think what these stories are trying to do, Dr. John Silence is trying to do, is trying to, without watering either one down, trying to acknowledge that there is weird and that there are ways to try and grapple with the weird. And we don't always have that toolkit, but if we use the power of our minds, the power of goodness or whatever, we can try and comprehend the weird in a way that doesn't totally destroy us.
Yeah. And I wonder if Blackwood is kind of in a different category than most other weird writers, because being that he was a member of the Golden Dawn, they have their own presuppositions about magic and the weird. Like, for them, magic is science that really hasn't been explained, or like, I guess you could say like a science of the spirit might be a way of getting this idea across. Like, by that, like magic has rules and laws. Spiritual things have rules and laws. The occult has rules and laws. We just have to discover them and be initiated into them. But I think we got a lot more reading to do. And I think that there's so much more to learn about this topic and what's going on during this century of writers. So let's dig into it. I'll talk to you later, Bob.
It was a John Silence joke. I was being silent. Talk to you later, Zach.